When I was younger, I would go around collecting old vintage toys, mainly around franchises that I love. And one particular brand caught my eye, Aliens. But as a 90s action figure line, well, believe it or not, this actually happened. And yes, this is the same alien where people die gruesome, violent deaths, and the same alien where monsters or facehuggers in the film will have to reproduce by, well, and not only that, but characters from Aliens also feature totally radical redesigns, and the xenomorphs themselves having some really goofy variants. But despite all this, I love the toy line for what it is. But that begs the question, was this toy line supposed to have a tie-in animated Saturday morning cartoon to go with it? I mean, a lot of 80s toy lines and 90s toy lines also featured a cartoon to help market and advertise it. And I mean, the general feel and kind of how the toy line plays out does suggest that there was supposed to be some kind of tie-in animated series to go with it. And it just kind of generally feels that way. But to my surprise and shock, there was actually no tie-in cartoon made about aliens. And to even further the mystery, the term Operation Aliens appeared on tons of merchandise that went with the line, like pencils and board games and other items as well, that furthered the mystery. And even more, animated stills of a supposed lost animated pilot for this canceled cartoon Alien series came out on the web and only furthered the mystery. The legend only grew more and more as supposedly there was a lost pilot even to be found. The story goes that apparently this animated pilot was put into production, but that the people involved deemed it too violent for a kids animated TV series and canceled the whole production before it even got to the air. Plus, the reception of Alien 3 apparently contributed to this cancellation as well. And for many years and decades, supposedly the people involved tried to keep this thing under wraps, and the supposed legend of this lost aliens cartoon only grew larger and larger. But what is the actual real truth behind this Saturday morning animated cartoon about aliens, this so-called Operation Aliens? Well, the truth is actually a bit surprising, so overall, let's find out. The legend surrounding this lost alien cartoon that runs around the web would have you believe that there was actually a lost pilot episode produced but was cancelled at the last minute by Fox after Alien 3 underperformed, and also many believing it was too violent for kids TV. I mean, many people are also proving the fact that this was a real thing because those animated stills were floating around online. So that must be proof that this animated pilot was a real thing. But sadly, the truth of this is actually a lot more different than you actually believe. The real story of Operation Alien starts all the way back in 1979, when Kenner, the toy manufacturer, was producing a line of action figures for the film Alien. But due to the violent nature of the movie and many retailers unable to sell the merchandise due to that fact, Kenner only released an 18-inch Alien action figure nicknamed the Big Chap. This early involvement with Alien got Kenner thinking about other toy possibilities for the series, which only furthered with the film Aliens, which had multiple xenomorphs and more of an action movie feel to it, and of course, space marines. Kenner, seeing potential dollar signs, wanted to design a line of action figures geared mainly towards kids but based on a violent film, which may seem odd today, but many films back in the 80s actually had tons of violent franchises like RoboCop or Rambo had cartoons made from them, and even toy lines made from them, ironically also from Kenner as well. Kenner saw massive potential in this Aliens toy line idea and developed it further, giving all the Space Marines more distinct designs compared to the film, like Drake having camo pants for some reason, Apone having a really 90s look to him, and Ripley wearing a brightly colored clothing compared to the final film. Also, the aliens themselves have tons of variants this time around. There's Bull Alien, Snake Alien, Rhino Aliens, and just the list goes on with variants. Kenner really wanted to tap aliens into this kid action figure market, and to do that you gotta have lots of variants of various action figures. Kenner then would slap the title Operation Aliens on the toy line, and alongside other merchandise was being produced as well, all in an effort to kind of push aliens for more into a younger demographic area space. The only thing that was really missing from this planned toy line was the usual Saturday morning cartoon to tie in with and help promote it. But what was the actual story of this, and what are the myths and the truths in all this situation? Well, the truth was Kenner wanted to produce an episodic Saturday morning cartoon revolving the name Operation Aliens with this loose concept of space marines going around the universe stopping the alien infestation, kinda hence the operation part of the title. While developing this idea for the TV series and also their toy line, they would approach Fox Kids to develop the TV series, but right out of the get-go, the show was shot down and cancelled by Fox Kids president Margaret Loesch, who was responsible for many great shows like X-Men, and in general knew what the industry what worked and what didn't work, especially with kids animated programming. She reportedly was interested in the idea of a cartoon version of Aliens, but she knew with the new broadcasting standards it would be impossible. These new broadcasting standards, which were put in place in 1990, were called the Children's Television Act, which essentially put new stricter standards on kids animated programming, restricting all kinds of things, especially aliens and violence. And in general, Fox Kids knew that the new stricter standards meant the days of adapting R-rated franchises into cartoons and toy lines were over. And the Fox Kids president knew adapting Aliens into a cartoon kids show would be a real struggle to put on the air, especially with the new standards, which would for sure would have included censorship and a ton of changes that would have to be made. So basically, in knowing all these struggles that could potentially happen, she just basically shot down the idea from the beginning. Plus, Fox Studios, who at the time was heavy in development of Alien 3, did not want their Alien franchise to become something for kids, and in general just didn't really want the idea to happen as well. But many of you scolding online and pointing at the screen may say, well, what about those animated stills that have been floating around the online? There has to be proof of an animated pilot for this lost cartoon.
Bottom line, not gonna happen.
Well, the truth is that these animated stills were actually a part of 3 unaired Kenner commercials using animation to advertise the Kenner Aliens toy line. The commercials were directed and produced by veteran storyboard and comics artist Will Marginot, I'm sorry if I'm saying his last name wrong, who at the time was working for Graz Entertainment. He was hired by Kenner to draw up animated artwork based on the approaching Kenner toy line and storyboarded all the animated commercials for Kenner. And in later years, he would say that this is actually where those animated stills came from, not a lost pilot episode. The animation for these commercials are actually done by Acom Production, a South Korean animation studio which is pretty well known for their work on Transformers and Batman the Animated Series, among many others. The commercials were, from my knowledge, completed, but then Kenner's live action producer found out about a new snorkel camera that could actually give really nice detail and close-ups on the figures, and Kenner scrapped the whole animated commercials idea and pivoted towards live action commercials with actors to basically advertise their toy line, as shown here. And pretty much, yeah, that was the story behind those animated stills and the truth about the animated series for Aliens. Interesting though, those animated commercials I mentioned earlier are technically still lost media and have actually never been recovered. We only have the stills for them. Hopefully one day these lost commercials will come to the light of day and we all get to see what potentially could have been an Aliens cartoon in the 90s thanks to those commercials. After the animated series fell apart early in production, Kenner decided to rebrand the main toy line as Aliens, but where we kept the other pieces of merchandise with that same Operations Alien tagline, like the board games, pencils, and other items that were attached as merchandise for the toy line. Another thing I wanted to mention was some other interesting canceled aspects of the Operation Aliens merchandise and toy line that I wanted to mention but ultimately got scrapped. For example, there was a planned Operation Aliens video game handheld device by Tiger Electronics that was planned, and from the looks of it, it was supposed to be finalized before being pulled alongside other plans for a main game on consoles like Nintendo. Which all these plans kind of suggest that maybe Kenner and Fox maybe had some early ideas and plans for maybe this brand going mainstream before pulling the plug early on. Now you may be asking, why did they actually keep the Operations Alien tagline but making the main toy line Aliens? Well, my best guess is I'm assuming the Operations Alien branding was kept due to cost issues, as by this point they probably already put the branding on everything, and the idea of rebranding all the merchandise and recalling everything probably would have been really costly and a nightmare. Now, despite the animated series collapsing early on in production, the idea of an Operation Aliens in terms of an actual story and narrative, the ideas that Kenner had early on would eventually kind of come out to the mainstream. Eventually, the ideas that Kenner had in mind for their canceled Aliens cartoon idea seemed to be translated into a series of mini comics packaged with the action figures and were published and made by Dark Horse Comics, kind of a staple of the franchise and comics with the writers. These line of mini comics were titled Alien Space Marines, and there was a total of 13 of them actually published and made. And if you actually take the time to look into these mini comics, you actually get a feel of what the show might have been like. It also kind of explains more of the goofy aspects of the toy line itself, even having separate issues focusing on a certain variant of the aliens like the Bull Alien or alongside alongside the gorilla aliens or others. For the basic quick premise, it's similar to a lot of ideas that Kenner had early on, that basically Space Marines patrol the galaxy and are basically the major line of defense against a new alien infestation, setting up kind of an episodic formula that this comic follows. And each comic ends on a cliffhanger, basically setting up the next issue and also cleverly enticing you to buy more figures. The main cast features Ripley, Apone, Hicks, Bishop, Drake, and also they go to other different colonies fighting all different types of aliens. They also explain all the different types of alien variants, basically being explained that facehuggers basically having animal host and the embryos taking on the host traits. With the final issue of this comic running and the 13th issue basically being an Alien vs Predator comic that's basically standalone and have nothing to do with the main story. Overall, in my opinion, the comic book run's not too bad, and honestly it's pretty underrated. Obviously not as good as some of the other future Dark Horse Alien comics, but definitely gets you a feel of what this Aliens cartoon and idea could have been. Now for the aftermath of this lost cartoon and idea. Now for the toy line, which was rebranded to Aliens, it actually became a hit with Kenner, lasting for many years and even including the Predator as well eventually in the toy line. And after many years and after Kenner went under, eventually the legacy of this toy line would eventually reprise itself, as it inspired NECA to actually release updated versions of some of the figures in this toy line, and even with their mini comics included, which honestly these figures personally look amazing and are just fantastic upgrades. And now for the future of an idea of a kids alien cartoon. Well, it actually didn't die out with this version specifically, as later on other attempts were made, but ultimately most of them were shot down. So overall, that was the general story of the lost animated cartoon Operation Aliens. An interesting stories of myths, truths, and of course a lot of the feeling Mandela effect, to be honest, included in this. Now for my personal opinion on all this stuff. For the toy line and comics, I really enjoyed most of them. I liked the Aliens toy line that came out in our timeline. I loved the wacky variants of the aliens and marines, with my personal favorite being the Rhino alien. And for the idea of a Saturday morning cartoon version of Aliens, I definitely think the idea is very interesting. It definitely would have been a really cool show, to be honest with you. I can definitely see myself as a kid who, after watching Alien or Aliens, would have actually sat down and watched this lost cartoon. But at the same time, I could totally see why it was ultimately canceled, and maybe it was a good thing for the franchise overall. I mean, can you imagine how much censorship and how many things they would have to water down for a kid's cartoon? I don't know, maybe today they can actually get away with it, or maybe actually make some kind of more adult animated series. That absolutely could be possible, and it sounds like a great idea. By the end of the day, I could totally see why this was ultimately scrapped. Regardless, that was the interesting story of the collision of a very R-rated franchise, kids cartoons, and while you sometimes don't mix the two. Regardless, this whole story is an interesting story of the collision of a very R-rated franchise, kids cartoons, and why sometimes you don't mix the two. But hey, that was Operation Aliens. Peace, y'all.